My guest today on the Essential Coaching Skills podcast is Marilou Seavey of MindBridge NLP and Coach Training. She and her husband Jerry have been running this place in North Carolina for many years until fairly recently Jerry had an accident and has been unable to train or do much else for quite some time and has thrust Marilou into the role of caregiver more than anything else at the moment. So we want to hear from her and how that has affected her, what's really going on, and how we can perhaps help Jerry at the same time. Stay tuned. You are listening to the Essential Coaching Skills podcast, a show devoted to uncovering the systems and the secrets that set the best apart, where you learn how to take your coaching clients to the next level, while you grow the coaching practice of your dreams. So sit back and relax, or sit up and get excited. Either way, you might want to pay attention. This could be important. Marilou, welcome back to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
You have been through quite a lot since the last time I saw you.
Bit of an understatement.
Yes, it is. And so has your husband been through quite a lot. Could you just fill us in on what it is that I'm referring to, what you're talking about?
Sure. I'll give you a relatively brief story. So I was in Boston. I'd gone up for a dental appointment and to visit a friend who was in hospice, and that would be the last time I saw her. I called my husband on a Saturday morning and asked him to do something for me. We have a two-story home. He was upstairs and he was kind of reluctant. He said, yeah, he'd go downstairs and do it. And while we were talking, the phone went dead. I thought I heard him say something and then the phone went dead. And I thought, well, maybe he didn't really want to do it. So I called back. No answer. The line was off. And then I called our work line because he always picks that up. And then I called his cell and he didn't pick that up. And he had been having some trouble with his spine and was in PT for it. And I thought, do you fall down the stairs? Because that was his big thing for me, because I'm not always careful going up and down the stairs. And I thought, I need to do something. I called my neighbor. My neighbor has a key to the house. He went over. I'm thinking, did you trip on the cats? Did he slide? What happened? But I knew in my gut that something was off. So my neighbor Mike went over, rang the bell. Jerry didn't answer. I called him 10 minutes later. He said, well, Jerry didn't answer. I didn't want to just barge in. I said, Mike, go in. Something's wrong. He went in. He found Jerry at the foot of the stairs. He was conscious. The phone was next to him, but he couldn't get up. So Mike called the EMTs here and told them that, because I had already told Mike Jerry had a spine issue and was going to our local PT at the hospital. We live right pretty close to a major hospital. So he told the EMTs that they picked him up. They didn't put him on a spine board, which was really upsetting to me. And they brought him out. The gurney was outside. They brought him out and they told Mike they were taking him to Wake. Wake is the local hospital. Well, because they had said spine, they took him to the Wake Spine Trauma Center. Mike, my neighbor, closes the house up, gets in the car, goes to the local hospital and says, I'm here for Jerry Seavey. I'm the contact person. I'm waiting and waiting and waiting. And I call Mike and he says, well, they haven't said anything. And Mike, by the way, is in his 80s. So he's very with it, very sharp. And he was just waiting there. So another hour goes by and I call back again. I said, Mike, you got to find out. I need you to know. So he went up and they said, oh, he's not here. He was not admitted to this hospital. They ended up finding him at the other hospital, at the spine center, trauma center. So he calls the doctor, gets information. They say to him that, well, he's just in the emergency room. He said he's fine. And I'm thinking, this isn't right. Something's wrong. He fell down a flight of stairs. Mike calls me back. We're playing phone tag. And Mike calls me back and I said, just get me the name of the doctor. I called, got the doctor and said, he fell down the flight of stairs. I want a CT scan done. First of all, he's 76 years old. Anyone who's come in an emergency and can't get up from the floor needs to be looked at, not just set aside in the emergency room because he says he's fine. Because Jerry doesn't like to bother people. So that was 4:15. I last spoke to Jerry just about 11, 4:15, I'm talking to the doctor. 5:15, they do the brain scan. They do the CT, and he's rushed to the neuro ICU. His brain was bleeding from the time he fell down the stairs until the time they did the brain scan. And when I found that out, when the ICU called me and told me, I left. I mean, I got on the first plane available. Delta was great. They helped me get into Raleigh the next day. That was the soonest I could do. It's really surprising how people are supportive, because I was supposed to be flying first class and ended up way in the back. And the flight attendant got on and he said, this is one of the few times I get emotional. He said, you have to stay in the seats. This woman has to get out and get to her car, get to her husband. Still gets to me. So as I was going up the aisle, people were saying, we'll pray for you. Everything will be fine. It was really intense. So I got to the hospital. Friends picked up my luggage later. I went to the ICU, and they said he was in the critical list. I already knew that. And they said his brain was still bleeding and the swelling was pretty extreme, and that they didn't know if he would make it. And I don't know where my brain went, but generally under high stress, I go to what actions can I take? But there were no actions I could take. So I waited. By the next day, his brain, they thought they'd done, I think by then, 3 CT scans. And you can only do so many, because Jerry's a cancer survivor also. So the amount of radiation is critical in a situation like this. So they said his brain is swollen. And they showed me the CT scan, and his brain was swollen and everything was pushed to the left side. And all you could see was this black area, and it was blood. So it's just a wait and see, because they don't drill into the skull and extract the blood in this particular hospital. It's not one of the things they do. So I waited. He was a week in ICU. He was unconscious for most of it. Sometimes they'd sit him up. Sometimes he got very violent and he would pull out. They had to strap him down because he would pull out the tubes that they had. And he developed, or they discovered, I don't know if he developed it, they discovered AFib, a really severe AFib. Of course, AFib can lead to stroke. So, one thing compounded on another, and they move him from the neuro ICU across the hall to the cardiac ICU. And he's there for a week. And by the end of the week, he still has the AFib, he still has the brain bleed, but he's conscious and he's sitting up. And I'm there nonstop. And it's about 45 minutes from where I live. And I go in the morning and I stay as late as I can. By then he was eating, he lost a lot of weight. In total, in 10 weeks, he's lost like well over 20 pounds. So I'm feeding him and I'm helping them get him in bed and sit him up. And after a week of that, I'm pretty stressed by then, but what do I have to do? We had a plan. We were supposed to be, we run a training program. We run NLP and coaching course in Dubai, which was coming up. So I'm trying to decide, what do I do about the business? Jerry runs most of the business. How do I handle the finances? What is the insurance? I don't know. I mean, we had talked, like many couples, so many times about, well, let's make everything cohesive and organized in such a way that if something should happen, the other will know what to do. Well, we didn't do it. We just talked about it. So I called a friend. He tried to help me. Most of my friends are in Boston or Dubai. So I live in the Carolinas, and I've got my 82-year-old neighbor. That's it, and 1 or 2 other friends in the area. So after 2 weeks in the ICUs, they move him down to intensive therapy rehab, neuro rehab, and they start sitting him up, getting him to feed himself. And I don't know what's coming. When he was leaving the ICU, the neurosurgeon came over, because I was a bit of a bitch. I kept saying, I'm not hearing anything. I want to talk to the doctors. Nurses were great. Doctors, not to be seen. So this doctor comes in and she said, I admitted him into the ICU. She said, honestly, he's doing great. And I'm thinking, this is great. Really? She said, we didn't expect him to make it through the night. She said, and we never expected that he'd be conscious again. We thought he'd be brain dead. I mean, my heart sunk. So everything that came from that point on was better. He was it's about 2.5 weeks in the intensive neuro rehab, and then all done. Medicaid's done, insurance is done. here you go, take him home. And this is where it really struck me how little in the US there is support for people that find themselves with family members in situations like this. So what was available here, very different in this state than other states. I checked out one after another of the nursing facilities that was Medicare covered. And more than one I left in tears because they were so substandard. One place said, oh, we can have room for him because most everyone is in the COVID wing. I think, really? So my neighbor, again, the guy is a lovely couple. I'd go over there and I'd say, oh, I'm coming apart at the seams. Talk me back to earth. And he said, you know, Mary Lou, there's a couple of new houses up on about a mile or so away. He said they have wheelchair ramps. They could be care homes. So 8:30 the next morning, I'm knocking on the door of this house and saying, I don't know if I'm crazy, but are you a care home? It turned out they were, but they were an end of life care home. And Jerry wasn't at the end of his life, for sure. So this is the second time I broke down. And the woman she'd come in, we talked. Long story short, they had another house that had a room because someone had just passed away. And it was out of pocket, was not covered by Medicare. It was close by. It was about 7 miles from where I live, much better in terms of where I was at this point. And no, Jerry couldn't come here. It wasn't viable. So we got him in there. They accepted him. And even though in the end, they didn't like to see him leave because he was the only one that was communicative. And so he was there for several weeks, almost 2 months, and it was out of pocket and it was extravagant. I mean, it was just, everything was, I could have bought several Mercedes, put it that way. So at the point where I had everything lined up to go to Dubai because I needed to go forward with the program to keep the business going, to keep the money coming in, he was doing much better. He was eating, walking, his PT was good, his OT was good, speech therapy was getting him, he was moving along really rapidly. I had no idea how the brain really is amazing. I would say in classes, Doug, oh, it's a brain thing when we'd be talking about patterns, but it really is. There's the brain, and then there's the consciousness of what's going on. And I later, now when Jerry and I talked, he was conscious, aware of a lot, not all, but a lot, but he couldn't, his brain wouldn't do what he wanted it to do.
Oh.
So
Wow.
I had somebody to take care of him while I was going to be in Dubai. I had a nursing group lined up. Everything was all together, and then it all came apart. Here's where NLP comes into play. Through all of this, I'm being very resourceful, and I'm resilient anyway. That's just part of my nature, and I'm a problem solver. And the last place I'm going to go is into crisis mode because it doesn't do anything. And I work with narrative, and I know the story I tell myself is going to impact how I feel. And the beauty of my brain is that I have aphantasia. And aphantasia is you don't recognize imagery. You know things, but you don't see images. Like most people see images. I don't. But I have fabulous auditory recall. And I talk to which is why I get into narrative work, because I talk to myself all the time. So through all of this, I'm constructing an outcome, and the outcome seemed really viable. And one of my, who Linda Bonner, one of my former students who now lives in New York City, got me on the phone. And when I told her I'm not going to be able to go to Dubai, because she was coming to help teach there with me. Mm-hmm. And she said, did you do an ecology check? How is it coming apart? Because you work so hard to put everything in place. And I said, I did the ecology check for Jerry. Everything's in place. I cooked enough food for the month I was gone, for both my brother, who was going to be caring for him, for Jerry, for the whole neighborhood. I had the nursing, everything, everything lined up. And I checked the ecology for the students in Dubai, for myself, for the travel, all of it. And she said, did you check the ecology for your brother? And I was like, no, I didn't. And my brother had said, yes, he would come down and stay for 3 weeks to care for Jerry. He had cared for his invalid wife for 30 years until she passed away.
Mm.
It didn't occur to me how much that was going to put on him. And I called him as a last resort. And he said yes, because he's my brother. And when I finally called him back and said, you don't have to come, he already had his ticket. He said, I'm so grateful. He said, I would have done it for you. He said, but it would have taken a lot.
Mm.
In ecology, and in the outcome frame is this, the what will you gain, what will you lose, all of those tongue twisting, brain scrambling questions. I missed a piece. And that piece, once I got it, I knew I could stay. I called students, told people I'm not coming. And I started, after you called, I started thinking about what were the resources that I had based on not just NLP, but other elements of my life, other learnings of my life, that my friends who I would reach out to, they were panicking for me. I didn't need to, they did it. And I started thinking about how people deal with crisis. And that's when it started to look very different from my perspective and how I dealt with Jerry, because then I was home. And yes, he can go up and down the stairs. And I do have to, for the first week, I had to watch very carefully, be behind him. But he was doing great. His balance was great. His focus was great. He has I have it too, aphasia. So he doesn't catch certain words. He knows them, but he can't get them out.
Mhm.
Other than that, if you were to see him now, you wouldn't know that he had anything happen. If you were to have a conversation with him, though, you'd recognize something was different, because one of the things I discovered was he was getting very frustrated, as was I, when I'd speak to him, and he wouldn't respond. He simply wouldn't respond. And I'd say, do you understand? And he'd just look at me. It turned out that he could follow the content, but he couldn't place the content in the context.
I'm not
So
sure.
content is the story.
Okay.
Context is the set and setting of the story. So if I'd say, the nurses, and I didn't say at the place he was staying was called the retreat. At the retreat, he dealt with nurses in the hospital, in the rehab, in his current rehab. He didn't know where to place that information. He didn't have anything to anchor it to. So I had to learn to say, Jerry, now I'm talking about X. And then what I said to him, he could process and he'd respond. And it became so evident that that was the major piece, that everything was just streaming through his experience. And he didn't know how to isolate. I'd say, do you want this? Because I'm very general.
Mhm.
And I'd have something in my hand. He wasn't looking at it, but we had been talking about it previously. I'd make him a smoothie and I'd say, do you want it now? And he wouldn't know what the it was,
Mhm.
or when the now was, because his now is big, my now is small. And there were these obstacles to overcome in communication. And if I didn't manage my state, then that energy spilled out and that frustration hit him, and then he would get frustrated. And I knew that was the last thing his brain needed.
So
So,
let me just stop you. That's amazing. I mean, we often talk about the meta model and the importance of certain things, managing your state, asking ecology questions. In NLP, it's standard, but you're so deeply living it now, that you must be
yeah.
specific with the meta model. You have to be managing your state. This is, you said before we started the conversation, you're like, thank God for NLP. Um,
Yeah.
but it's really true that
Yeah.
these things have been absolutely critical for you to be able to do what you're doing and get through this incredibly difficult situation. Could you just, for the fun of it, for the people that don't know what the ecology questions are, what the ecology process is, could you just describe what?
Sure. So to enter into the ecology is the outcome that you want. Is it worthwhile? And are you willing to do what it takes to gain and maintain it? So that's one. And then you go into the deeper level of what outcome, what will you lose? What will happen? What won't happen? if you get it? What won't happen if you don't get it? What will happen if you don't get it? And is it, is this in the entirety of the system? Is it worthwhile? And in my case, I didn't include my brother in the system.
Right.
And that was the piece. And normally I do. I normally like scope out and scope out and scope out and scope out and scope out. How far out does it go until whatever I'm seeking is no longer relevant that far outside of my initial system or in circle of influence? And this point in time, I didn't. And I recognize it was because not only did I want class because I love teaching the material, and I wanted to make sure that the people who had planned on it, that I gave them what they were expecting, but I needed a break. And I'm real, I don't mind saying it, I really needed a break
Yeah.
because I had gone, by then it was going it's been almost 3 months, and I was going nonstop, getting up at 4:30 in the morning, be at the hospital by 9, stay there as long as I could, come back, fix a meal for him, bring it back, because they let me stay really late. And then once he went into the assisted nursing, go early in the morning, take him to his therapies, come back here, make sure that he had lunch, do the work, coach, because my coaching clients were wonderful. They let me just like reorganize my time scheduling. And then I'd feed him dinner, and then I'd take him back, and I come home and I collapse. And I needed a break.
Yeah.
And I saw my brother as that opportunity. And I about this because he knows what it was like, and he was fine. And I'm finding letting people need to know that there's nothing wrong with reaching a point where you just have to take care of yourself.
Yeah.
Because if you don't take care of yourself, you can't take care of your loved one.
Yeah. No, that's
And
really,
that's psychology.
yeah, that's ecology, true. And it is the kind of the unknown or unsung issue for caregivers everywhere. I mean, every caregiver knows that. Every person who's been thrust, as you have been, into the situation of being the caregiver for someone else, knows that, your job is to take care of another person and to find a way to take care of yourself, that you have to do that in order to be able to take care of the other person. And so often that is overlooked or said, oh no, that's not important, I have to take care of this. Both are important. You really have to be able to do that.
I've been meditating mostly on, sometimes off, for 40 something years. So getting up at 4:30 in the morning was, way earlier than normal.
Yeah.
But I had to do that because if I didn't meditate and if I didn't do some reading and I did follow some of my morning ritual, then I was no good for the rest of the day. And, I would often in the afternoon, I'd be just about conked out in the chair. And I found just taking a nap didn't work. But if I meditated, it did.
Oh, interesting.
That gave me the energy.
So Mary, let me just stop you for a minute. I'm going to pause the recording, and I'm going to. So you were saying that a nap won't necessarily do it, but meditating does
Oh,
recharge.
yeah. Definitely for me, some people on nap would be good, but meditating, even like for 15 minutes, just stilling my head. Because as I said, I have a lot of inner dialogue, and I was working to get the surface, and the deeper dialogue matched. Because if the deeper dialogue was, it's all coming apart, then the surface dialogue didn't matter because it was the deeper structure that was driving my state. And the meditation helped me remember and stay grounded and be present and, and use those resources. Be very conscientious about how I dealt with the staff at the hospital, because as of COVID, there were nowhere near the staff that was required. And so if I was frustrated or upset because I didn't see change in him or his needs met in the way I would like them to be met, and the staff, then that would spill out to him. And it wasn't fair to them. These people were beyond, these nurses were amazing. And when he finally left, when he left both the ICU and when he left the intensive rehab, I gave them all a gift. And one of the nurses broke down and she said, no, nobody recognizes it. And I said, nobody? It just comes out when you've got NLP. And she said, well, most people don't. She said, we're just we're part of the hospital. And it made I would bring him meals because the hospital food was like one step below airline food. And there were a few of the nurses there that were like, oh, that smells so good. And I was making so much, I'd bring some for them too.
Mhm.
And then can I have some? And they were so appreciative of just little things. And I think it made a difference because it created a better environment for him when they were caring for him. And they took a little extra attention to him because he was didn't sleep well at night, and he'd try to get out of bed, and I mean, they couldn't risk a fall. And he ripped out all of the wires from the wall that alerted them that the bed, because there was an alarm on the bed. So he couldn't find the alarm on the mattress. So he ripped it off. Like, oh, Jerry, what is doing? He just knew he wanted to get up, and the alarm would let them know. So they moved the station right to the front of his room. And I don't know that they would have done that. And they didn't, at least I don't think they've charged me for the, the equipment. But anything they could do to help him, they would. And they had a lot on their hands. I mean, it was the recovery ward, the rehab ward was neuro, and for both people with neurological damage, brain damage, and people with amputations. So it was not an easy place.
No, not at all. Yeah, no, I worked in a hospital for a few years, and yeah, it's not an easy place. I was doing hypnosis for patients prior to surgery, post as well, but mostly prior to surgery. But I was certainly in the ICU in different wards and not just mostly heart patients that I was working with, but also cancer patients and other people as well. So I've certainly seen a lot of the types of things you're describing, where the nurses are just doing beyond yeoman's duty. It's just and pretty thanklessly as well. They get notified when there's a problem.
Yeah.
It's not good, but
Yeah.
human beings as well. And it's really useful for us to hear this story because it could happen at any moment that we all are thrust into this caregiver's thing, and also to do what you did prior to the caregiving thing that you're doing now, but to be the proactive patient in hospitals. People don't usually think about what else could be going on or whatever. They need you as a patient, and they need us as the patient or the patient advocate to say, I want the CT scan, which you did for Jerry. That nobody would have done that. They said, oh, he's an old man sitting in the corner and yeah, it's just like, no, do it now. Go and be that pain in the ass, be that, thorn in their side, be that person who's going to, get that done, because nobody else is gonna. Nobody else is gonna.
It's interesting when, the medical system here in the US is so supposedly so profound. Well, it is. And depends on where you are and how much money you have. Here in North Carolina, this is Duke and Wake and Rex. These are some of the top.
Sure.
But once Jerry was out of the hospital, everything fell apart. We were supposed to get a cardiologist. No referrals for cardiologists. We were supposed to have a neurologist. No referrals. We were supposed to have another brain scan. No referrals, because now he's in private care, and it's up to us to manage it. And they had a system, used to be doctors bought out by someone else, and they didn't have any connections. So I called my cardiologist, who wasn't taking new patients. She said yes. When we saw her, she said, what do you mean he hasn't had another brain scan? She got a friend of hers who was a neurosurgeon. We had a brain scan done like that. He saw Jerry within a few days. And because he said to Jerry, he looked at him, he said, if you weren't standing there right next to me, and then this is like 7 weeks out from the accident, he said, and I just looked at that brain scan, I would say, this guy's not going to make it. He said, this level of bleed was huge. He said, now this brain Saturday, he said, see that dark area? He said, it's not as dark, it's a gray area. He said, that's cerebral fluid. He said, you have no brain tissue there. So Jerry's left front lobe is basically gone.
Oh my goodness.
That's the critical decision making, it's impulse control, and it's personality. And I had been told that that was where the damage was, and that, you know, we did not know who would be coming back if he could. This man is amazing. He's back telling jokes, the same old jokes. Heard this before.
That was
There are
great.
things that I could not do in the computer that now other things, you know, yeah, there's big holes, and he has no memory from before the accident until after, you know, it's somewhere maybe the second or third day in ICU. He doesn't have no memory of pulling any of the wires out.
Mm,
But at a certain point, his consciousness came back and he started to become aware,
mm,
but he's hanging out in the background and things were happening. And it was just easier just to hang out in the background. So little by little, he's become more responsive, more effective in taking care of himself. And for me, it's like, well, let me do this for you. And I said, can't do that. You got to let him do it for himself. So big issue now is he wants to drive, and that's not going to happen just yet. He's got
yeah.
to see a neurologist, but he can do things that I can't do, you know, and some things I'll ask him to do and we'll make an agreement. But if I haven't framed it properly, he doesn't recall that he agreed to it.
Mhm.
And he'll hear to what he wants to hear. So he heard the neurosurgeon say, he said the bleed is gone, it's been absorbed, which should take about 6 weeks. Took 6 months, took only 2 or 3 months. When he said, the neurosurgeon said the cerebral fluid is there, Jerry heard my brain is back. And when we went to the cardiologist, to him, he can't get AFib meds because they're blood thinners if you've got a brain bleed.
Mm,
So we go back to the cardiologist, and rather than argue with him, I said, can you look at his scan and tell us how you understand it? Because he thinks his brain tissue's back. She was brilliant. She said, well, because Jerry was like, and she said, well, wait a minute, let me find out. She said, well, that's interesting. She said, what I see is, she said, this brain, not your brain. She said, this brain has severe damage, and this brain here, this image of this brain here has cerebral fluid, but no tissue. She said, so let me read what the records were. And she read it and then came back and she said, your wife's right. She said, but what's remarkable about the brain is your brain is rewiring. She said, it's going to take you quite a while, but your brain can rewire almost completely.
mm.
Now, completely. Coincided with all of this, did you ever see and if anyone's listening has not seen the TED Talk, A Stroke of Insight, it's
Oh, yeah,
absolutely amazing.
it's remarkable.
So I bought her recent book, the author's recent book, and she talks about it's called Whole Brain Living, and she talks about the recovery and the different aspects of self. Well, through all of this, the few resources that I have had, one I have had for years, is a guy named Stephen Josephs. He was one who brought me into NLP.
Hmm.
I've been in touch with him for years. He was is a close friend of Leslie's. He's a close friend of Connie Ray's. I reached out to him. He's a friend of Jill Boyden Taylor, the woman who wrote Whole Brain Living that had the stroke. And he gave me resources to help Jerry that I would never have known. He just like laid one out after another,
Hmm.
and here, go after this. And so the support that comes, I have a community in Dubai that I've been updating them what's going on. The support that comes from them, it's amazing. It's you can do this, Mary Lou, keep going. We're praying for you. We're sending healing energy. You're not alone in this. People caretake, you feel alone.
Yeah.
You just do.
Yeah.
And to hear others say, we've got your back, even if they're not present, it's huge. It's really huge, because you have to keep focused on what's here and the next step and the next step and the next step. If you go too far out, it can be overwhelming.
Yeah. Well, listen, I thank you for being on this show today. I don't want to take too much more of your time, but I did want to have you on here for a variety of reasons. One is to let people know you were on the podcast earlier not this year, I think maybe late last year, but you were on previous episode. And we learned a lot about the way that you've worked in NLP and how you've trained in coaching. But this very significant life change has been huge for you and for Jerry, of course. But for many other people, we can learn a bit from you about how you are dealing with it, and the importance of things that we sort of think of academically or in a good coach technique, whatever. But the ecology checks, the managing your state, those are really important for us to be able to be caregivers if we're thrust into that situation, to be patient advocates or self-care advocates, to take care of yourself, to meditate, do whatever it takes to be able to be in that place and to be resilient, to have all these resources available to you, and to also know that people do have your back. And one of the people that you, I think, worked with in Dubai, I'm not sure who it was, has set up a GoFundMe site. Is that right? For Jerry, help Jerry Seavey heal, I think it's called, at GoFundMe.
Help Jerry heal.
Help Jerry heal.
Help Jerry heal.
So if
made a huge difference. A huge difference.
So if people go to GoFundMe and look for Help Jerry heal, they'll find that that GoFundMe site. I'll certainly put the link to it in the thing below. But that's really important, because you said most of this is out of pocket for you now. That all this care that you're doing, you could have bought several Mercedes. It's a lot of money, and it's all out of pocket.
Yep, it is.
And you're not being able to go to Dubai to do the work.
No, I pushed it off till January.
He was also one of the trainers. He was one of the big trainers for you. It was you and him mostly, right? Yeah.
So I moved it to January, and I bought a ticket to bring him with me. We've got plenty of friends over there who will be thrilled to spend time with him. And if he continues the way he's going now, he probably, knowing Jerry, he'll want to teach. He won't have to sustain an entire day, but he'll get up there, because the brain is amazing. And consciousness, that part of self that informs the brain, who we are, that's still there.
Amazing, isn't it? It really is amazing. It really is amazing. The brain is an amazing thing. And of course, that's my brain saying that, but still. All right. Well, thank you so much for being here today. And
you're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, good luck.
Well, I have more than luck.
Yeah. Well, all of it. Thanks.
Thanks, Doug.
This has been the Essential Coaching Skills Podcast. Thank you for being here. It's a pleasure seeing you again. Hope to see you again real soon. Come back next week when we have another gripping and exciting episode of the Essential Coaching Skills Podcast. And if you want to, you can find out more about us, each and every one of us, at essentialcoachingskills.com. Thanks.